What I found in the roots. The air in the Oregon Cascades has a specific weight to it, especially in late September. Crisp, smelling of damp earth and pine needles slowly surrendering to decay. It was a Tuesday, I remember that clearly. My work was slow, a freelance slump, and the familiar ache for the woods near Silver Pines. A town barely clinging to the map east of Eugene had gotten under my skin. I used to camp out there years ago with friends whose faces are blurry now, replaced by mortgages and kids. We'd hike the established trails around Lake Merrill, but back then, we'd also push further, seeking that quiet isolation only deep forest offers. That's what I was after that day. Solitude. Not the curated kind on a park map, but the dense, watchful silence off the old logging roads, where the only paths are made by deer. I'd been walking for maybe 3 hours, following a faint game trail that wound uphill through firs so thick they choked out most of the undergrowth. The light was already starting to slant, casting long, distorted shadows. That's when my boot caught on something solid, something that shouldn't have been there, half buried under a mat of moss and decaying leaves. Not a root, too smooth, too angular. I stumbled, swore softly, and knelt down, brushing away the damp debris with my hands. It was a phone, an older model smartphone, encased in one of those thick, heavy-duty rubber cases designed to survive construction sites or clumsy teenagers. Mud was packed into the ports and speaker grills, but the case itself was intact. It looked like it had been there a while, maybe a season or two, nestled amongst the tree roots as if deliberately hidden. Curiosity, that stupid human default, kicked in hard. Why would someone bury a phone way out here? Lost, maybe, but buried. That felt intentional. I wiped the worst of the mud off on my jeans. The case had a small flap over the charging port. I pried it open, my fingers cold and clumsy. The port looked clean enough inside. Back at my car, parked miles away on a dirt pull off near the main gravel forest road, I had a portable battery pack. I figured I'd charge it, see if it worked, maybe find an owner's contact inside. Standard lost and found procedure, right? I dropped it into my backpack, the solid weight of it suddenly feeling more significant than it had a moment before. The woods seemed quieter then, the shadows deeper between the trees. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just the chill of the fading afternoon. It took me over an hour to hike back to the car. The light was failing fast, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges by the time I reached the old Subaru. I plugged the phone into the battery pack, half expecting nothing. But after a few tense minutes, the screen flickered weakly. A low battery icon appeared. Then, miraculously, the home screen loaded. It wasn't locked. No passcode, no fingerprint prompt, just open. That was the first real chill, the first prickle of unease. That wasn't just about being alone in the woods at dusk. Who leaves their phone completely unprotected, especially if they're burying it? No signal, of course, not out here. I swiped through the apps. Standard stuff. A weather app, a calculator, a notes app. My thumb hovered over the gallery icon. That curiosity again, warring with a growing sense that this wasn't just a lost phone. I tapped it. The gallery was a mess. Hundreds of photos, mostly blurry shots of trees, dirt tracks, the underside of a car. But it was the video files that drew my eye. Dozens of them, dated just over 2 years ago. The file names were cryptic. Obsfay, 1, Houseback, Movement Night, Final. The thumbnails were dark, indistinct. I plugged in my earbuds. My hands were shaking a little now, and it wasn't just the cold seeping into the car. I opened the first video labeled Observe 1. The screen showed shaky footage, filmed from behind a thicket of salal bushes. The lens was zoomed in, grainy. It focused on a house. Not a cabin, but a proper, if run down, house. Peeling white paint, a sagging porch, a rusted pickup truck parked haphazardly on the overgrown lawn. I recognized the style. There were places like that scattered in the hills outside Silver Pines. The camera panned shakily to the left. A man stood on the porch. Big guy, thick through the shoulders, wearing a stained flannel shirt. He was yelling, gesturing wildly towards the door, though the audio only picked up a muffled, angry rumble. Then, the camera jerked, zooming in on a window beside the door. A young woman's face was briefly visible, pressed against the glass. She looked terrified. Pale, eyes wide, mouth open in what could have been a scream or a sob. The image was fleeting, maybe 2 seconds, before she was yanked away from the window, out of frame. The man on the porch turned back towards the house, his expression vicious. The video ended abruptly. My mouth was dry. I sat in the driver's seat, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. Okay. Domestic dispute. Ugly, scary, but plausible. Maybe the guy filming was a neighbor, concerned. Maybe he was trying to gather evidence. The next few videos confirmed that. House Back 2 showed the same house from a different angle, partially obscured by a dilapidated shed. The audio was clearer this time. The man was audible now, his voice a guttural roar. Get back inside. You think anyone cares? You think anyone's coming? Then the sound of something heavy hitting wood, and a stifled cry. The filmer's voice spoke for the first time in log 1. It was a man's voice, hushed, tense, but calm. Educated, maybe. He identified himself as David Arlen, said he'd been observing the house for weeks. Said the woman's name was Lisa something. He didn't catch the last name. He thought she was being held against her will. He'd seen the man, who he named as Roy Dempsey, dragging supplies into the house, rarely letting Lisa out, and only under close watch. David said he'd called the county sheriff's office twice. Said the first time, a deputy drove out. Talked to Roy on the porch for 5 minutes, laughed at something Roy said, and left. The second time, they didn't even send anyone, just told him over the phone, without taking his name, that they'd look into it. Nobody gave a damn. The videos progressed. David's tone shifted. The calmness eroded, replaced by a wire-tight tension. Log 4 was filmed inside a car, rain streaking the windshield. He was whispering, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. He'd followed Roy once, down to a bar on the edge of Silver Pines. Saw Roy talking to a guy David recognized, Carl Meeks. Carl wasn't just some local drunk. Carl was on the town council. His family owned half the land around here, including parcels leased for logging. David said Roy and Carl were thick as thieves. He started talking about connections, about how things work in small towns where old names carry weight. He said he felt watched. Said his own car, an old blue Tacoma, had been tampered with. A loose lug nut he swore he'd tightened just the day before. Paranoia, maybe, but the fear in his voice was real, contagious. It seeped through the earbuds and into my bones. The videos became shorter, darker. Movement night was almost pitch black, filmed from what looked like the edge of the woods bordering Roy's property. Infrared, night vision. The image was grainy, green, and black. A figure moved near the shed, Roy. He was carrying something long and heavy wrapped in a tarp. He loaded it into the bed of his truck. covered it with more tarps, and drove off down the dirt track leading away from the house. David's breathing was loud, ragged in the audio. He didn't speak. The final video was labeled simply final. The timestamp was 2:17 a.m., 2 years and 1 month ago. The image was pure darkness at first, just the rustling sound of leaves. Then David's voice, a bare whisper, so close to the mic it was almost a vibration in my skull. If anyone finds this, if I'm gone, it's because of him, because of what I saw, what I know. They're connected. Roy, Carl, maybe others. Lisa's gone. I know she is. I went back after he left with whatever that was. The house was empty, trashed like a fight or cleaning. I found her hair tie outside near the woodpile. Purple. She always wore a purple one. He paused. The silence was heavier than the whispering. Then a sound. Not in the audio, but outside the frame. A crunch, like a footstep on dry leaves. Close. David froze. His breathing stopped. The camera held low, tilted slightly upwards, catching a sliver of moonlight filtering through the trees. It illuminated the edge of a boot, heavy work boot, not David's. Oh God, he's here. David's whisper was pure terror. There was a rush of movement, a blur of green and black as the camera swung wildly. A grunt, not David's, a sickening thud. Then the sound of the phone hitting the ground, a hard impact. The image spun, sky, ground, tree trunks whirling. For a split second, the lens pointed towards the house. A light was on in an upstairs window. Then the image settled, tilted at a crazy angle, showing only dirt and roots. Heavy footsteps approached the phone, fast, purposeful. A shadow fell over the lens. A hand, large, dirty, reached down towards the screen. The video cut to black, static. Silence. I ripped the earbuds out. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold car. I stared at the black screen of the phone in my hand, then out the windshield at the darkening forest. The familiar trees suddenly looked like sentinels guarding terrible secrets. David Arlen, Roy Dempsey, Lisa, gone. I felt sick. I'd just watched a man's last moments, heard his death. I drove back to my rented cottage on the outskirts of Silver Pines in a daze. The phone sat on the passenger seat like a live grenade. I couldn't leave it in the car. I brought it inside, placing it on the kitchen table, avoiding looking at it. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night hunched over my laptop, the curtains drawn tight, fueled by dread and cheap coffee. David Arlen. I typed the name into a search engine, adding Silver Pines, Oregon, and missing. It took some digging through local news archives and a state missing persons database, but I found him. David Michael Arlen, reported missing by his sister in Portland 2 years and 1 month ago. Last seen in Silver Pines. Occupation, freelance environmental surveyor. His case file, what little was publicly accessible, was sparse. No evidence of foul play suspected. No signs of struggle at his rented room. Vehicle, a blue Toyota Tacoma, never found. Case archived after 6 months due to lack of leads. Presumed voluntary disappearance or accident. The report mentioned he'd expressed anxieties about his work to his sister, but nothing specific. Nothing about Roy Dempsey. Nothing about Lisa. Nothing about a phone buried in the woods. Lisa was harder. No last name. Searching missing women in the area around that time yielded nothing obvious. A few runaways, one overdose in Eugene. no one matching her vague description linked to Silver Pines. It was like she'd never existed, or like she'd been erased. I knew what I had to do, even though every instinct screamed to throw the phone into the deepest part of Lake Merrill and forget any of this happened. But David's whisper, "If anyone finds this," echoed in my head. He'd buried it, hoping someone would, hoping for a reckoning. The next morning, feeling hollowed out and shaky, I drove to the county sheriff's office in the next town over, larger than Silver Pines. I asked to speak to a detective. I was shown to a small, windowless interview room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant. A detective came in, a man in his late 40s with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, "Det Carson." I placed the phone on the table between us and told him everything, finding it, powering it on. The videos, David Arlen, Roy Dempsey, Lisa, the final video. I described the contents in detail, my voice surprisingly steady, though my hands trembled slightly in my lap. Detective Carson listened. He took notes. He asked a few clarifying questions: where exactly I found it, the dates on the videos. He put on gloves and examined the phone himself, scrolling briefly through the gallery, his expression unreadable. He watched a few minutes of Observe 1 and the beginning of Final. When the shadow fell over the lens, he stopped it. He didn't watch further. He looked up at me. "That case," he said, referring to David Arlen, "that was a while back. Archived, no evidence." He asked why I was hiking so far off trail. He asked if I knew Roy Dempsey or Carl Meeks. I said no, just passing through Silver Pines occasionally, knew the area from years back. He nodded slowly. His tone wasn't hostile, not exactly. It was detached, professional, cool, like I was reporting a stolen bicycle, not handing over evidence of a probable murder and cover-up. He took the phone, said they'd look into it, said they'd be in touch if they needed anything else. He thanked me for doing the right thing. His handshake was firm, brief, and utterly devoid of warmth. As I walked out of the station into the weak autumn sunlight, I didn't feel relief. I felt a cold stone settling in my gut. His eyes, they hadn't held surprise or outrage, just a weary kind of resignation maybe, or something else, indifference or recognition. For a week, nothing happened. Life resumed its mundane rhythm. I tried to work, tried to sleep. The woods outside my window no longer looked peaceful. They looked like a place where things got buried. Every creak of the old cottage at night made me start. Every car that drove slowly past my isolated place on Spruce Hollow Road seemed to linger just a fraction too long. I told myself it was just the residue of fear, the power of suggestion, David's paranoia infecting me. Then, on the 8th day, I saw the car. A dark sedan, maybe a Ford, older model. No front license plate. The back plate was covered with one of those plastic dealer plate holders, but it was folded inwards, obscuring the numbers completely. It was parked down the road, partially hidden by a cluster of alder trees, when I left for the grocery store in Silver Pines. When I came back an hour later, it was still there. I drove past my own driveway, looping around the block. When I came back, it was gone. 2 days later, I found the note. Not in my mailbox. Tucked under the worn doormat on my front porch. Plain white paper, folded once. Typed, not handwritten, in a generic font. Stop asking questions about things that don't concern you. Forget the phone, leave it buried. No signature, no threats, just a cold, clear command. That was it for me. The stone in my gut turned to ice. Detective Carson's weary eyes. The sedan with no plates. This note, delivered silently to my door. David Arlen's desperate whisper, "They're connected." I didn't pack much, just clothes, my laptop, essentials. I threw them into the Subaru that night. I didn't leave a forwarding address with the landlord, just paid the next month's rent in cash, and said a family emergency called me away. I drove south before dawn, watching the rearview mirror constantly. I didn't stop until I hit California. That was last year. I live in a small apartment near the coast now. The ocean air is different. It doesn't hold onto secrets like the deep woods do. Sometimes, on clear nights, I look north towards Oregon. I never heard a single thing from Detective Carson or the sheriff's office. I checked the news archives for Silver Pines periodically for months. Nothing about David Arlen, nothing about Roy Dempsey being arrested, nothing about a missing woman named Lisa. It's like the phone and everything on it vanished into the same void David did. I never found out what happened to Lisa. I never found out exactly what David saw that got him killed. I never learned the full reach of those connections he whispered about. I moved. I stayed quiet. I buried my own curiosity deep. But some things don't stay buried. The weight of that phone in my hand. The grainy image of Lisa's terrified face against the glass. The absolute silence after the thud on that final video. The crunch of that boot on the leaves. The shadow falling. I didn't find answers. I found a grave for a secret someone powerful wanted to keep. And the knowledge of that secret, even incomplete, even without proof, is a cold companion. It's the feeling of eyes on your back when you're alone in a parking lot late at night. It's the hesitation before answering the door to a stranger. It's the absolute certainty that sometimes the woods don't just hide beauty. They hide the things we're not meant to see. And those things, once seen, refuse to be unseen. They just haunt. If this story kept you listening until the end, consider supporting the channel. Click like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you have a story of your own, a real experience, or a nightmare you can't forget, send it to the email in the video description. You might hear your story told here next. Thanks for watching. Sleep well.